recovery centers. But
Didn't work.
it never worked. 5 gates worked.
No.
But you know, the attitude that they have is, so it's another one, I'll try it. And what you really want to make them impressed with is, this is new, psychodynamic. This is new and it is psychodynamic, and you couldn't have gotten this anywhere else because there's only one place to get it. And the most important thing, you must stress, because it helps them get well. Well, having listened to everything, I feel pretty confident it's going to work. You must give them that assurance. Even if you're not sure. Yes, Marv?
What is psychodynamic?
Oh, changes the direction of your mind. In other words, here you have this mind that's constantly in the dumps, and you know, everything is bad, and I'm not so good, and I'll probably screw this up, I'll probably get fired, blah, blah, blah. They laid off Jeff the other day, I'm sure I'm next. And walking around, you know, and it changes the direction.
Of your mind or your thinking? You said mind.
Together. Actually, it's a great question. You can't change how they feel unless you change how they think. They can't change how they feel by, you know, they could use some drug, or they could, they can do things to change how they feel artificially, but the negative feelings will just come right back.
So it changes the direction of their mind and thinking.
Yes, it changes the direction of their thinking, which in turn changes how they feel. Okay? And it's pretty instantaneous. Now, the person is sitting in front of you, and if you're going to charge money, you better tell them that right at the beginning. And I'll make a suggestion. If you're going to charge money, don't charge them more than a couple of grand, because you don't have enough practice yet. Later on, you'll charge 5 grand. That's what I was charging. I just doubled it to 10 because I don't really want more patients. I want use guys to get the patients. And we'll get into some of that practical stuff about money and the program and everything, because I wanted to talk a little about that today. But I certainly felt remiss for never having discussed the initial interview. Now, you want to make sure that you know something about their schedule. So you want to ask them. I'm going to ask you to, now first of all, don't waste your time with the first 3 gates on a new client. The real way the program should be done is start with the interview, followed by the 4th gate, followed by the 5th gate, followed by the first very quickly, the second very quickly, maybe a little less quickly, the second one. You really, really, really want them to get into the 3rd. And I don't know if I did enough with you guys on the 3rd, so you may want to ask me some questions about the 3rd gate. It is critical. And so this morning, I'll say a few words about the 3rd gate.
How do you say that in the interview? You start the interview, that's where I am.
You start with the interview, and that's what we've actually been doing here, is talking about what goes on in the interview. You also want to tell them that a lot of people have gotten well with this program. It's a pretty reliable tool. Because you gotta have their hopefulness to get them to sit down and do this drudgery of the 4th gate. Because you're about to slam them right into their 4th gate. Don't waste time. Just, you know, right there in the initial interview, hand them the questionnaire. And I'm going to have some printed up so that people don't have to be given the book. Actually, I'm also going to have a version made interactive for a computer where the questions pop up. And I have been toying with a couple of versions of how to do the 4th gate, but I am not sure that high tech is the right answer. Questions popping up, fine. Keep them on one question at a time. That's good. So if they get a laptop, you know. But, and you'll be able to point them, you'll be able to download a form, or you just give them a flyer that has all the questions on it. Maybe we should incorporate our brochure that way, I don't know. I'm going to need some help with the brochure from you all. So anybody that's got ideas, you guys need the brochures, I don't need them. But you want to have some at the ready, so when somebody asks you about it, you can, hey, this will tell you a lot about it. And that will then, in turn, create something that makes it seem more official to them. See, I actually had one at one time. I used to have a brochure at one time. And it actually did some good service. Okay. Now, if you're going to collect money for this program, collect it on the initial meeting, or at least no later than before you start your fifth gate with them. Payouts don't work. You know what payouts do? Payouts actually drag down their level of recovery and drag down their commitment level. Because what happens is it spoils your relationship with them if they have not fully paid you.
Oh, yes.
So it sits as a weight on them,
Bad.
and they may even want to justify by saying it didn't work, not paying you any more money. Which is not the way you make it work. You make it work with commitment. So you slam them right into their fourth gate following the initial interview. Now, who has some more questions about the initial interview?
I think that's, Doctor, you and I were about the same thing, like during the initial interview, then we slam them right into the fourth gate, and we also collect the money up front.
Take their check.
Is everything.
Absolutely. Never delay taking a check because it helps them get well. It not only puts a couple of shekels in your pocket, it helps them get well because they're going to be more committed to taking this program with all their might. They paid for it. They're going to want to do it right.
Locks them in,
Huh?
more or less. So if they're for real, that locks them
Locks in their commitment.
Oh,
Who was asking me a question? Yeah.
I was watching your thing last week.
Okay.
One of the things that you said is that you don't really take notes. Can you take notes, first of all?
I recommend against it.
Okay, and the second thing is, you mentioned that there were tricks to how to remember things, and we never talked about it, so I'm...
We
gonna
can
put
tape
you-
them on MP3 or not?
You absolutely can, and you should.
Yeah.
Because that's a teaching thing. When we get back together again in, say, a month, I'm hoping some of you have a handful of patients or clients you've already taken through the program. We're out there now looking for patients, and we're going to talk about that today. But when you record them, it gives you something to listen to later so that you can improve your technique. It gives you something you can play for me in my office when I see you, or if you just make an appointment to come in and you want to play excerpts from it and ask me questions, or was this the most effective thing I could have said or done?
Do we have to tell them that we're taping them or not?
No, you're not obligated to tell them. That's not breaking the law. That's only on the telephone. You can't record people. And in fact, if you're a participant in a phone conversation, you can record it. But no, you don't have to. That's a standard thing. You go to any shrink back in the days when, shrinks actually had couches and people talked to them. They always record it, every word of it, and you'll want to.
recorded my mom.
You'll want to. You'll want to do that.
So what are some of the tricks to help remember?
Okay.
If you're not using...
I can only tell you how I do it. I can't tell you how everyone else in the world does it. Now, there's a and I'm actually not going to speak enough directly to your question, because I happen to have a good memory. So, and also never feel awkward or embarrassed. Now, try to remember very much their parents' and grandparents' names. And if there's a sibling that's of any real significance, like my brother kept pushing me down, or he kept dragging me under the house to play doctor, or whatever, if there's a significance to a sibling or a playmate, try to remember that name too. Now, by the way, if you had a pad and you only wrote down names, M equals Amma, D, Dad, equals Richard. If you did nothing more than that, that would not break your interview. And that's the only thing that's very specific, that it's so good for you when you're working with them. Now, I don't usually write them down. And in fact, I don't get embarrassed. Sometimes I'll say, why'd you say your mother's name was? Just like there's nothing wrong with asking it, even though you've told me 3 times. Just ask them. I keep forgetting your mother's name. I can remember so many things you told me about her, but I can't remember her darn name. Try to avoid that. But if you have to, don't get scared. You're not going to hurt anything. In fact, you really want to do something else too. You want to remind them of things they've said all the time for several reasons. one, to show you're involved. You're paying attention. You're not yawning. The clock is not ticking. So, aside from the things you definitely want to repeat because they're part of their trauma, you want to also show signs now and then along the story that you're actually paying attention. In the initial interview, if you get good at it, you're going to probably get out of them what their fifth gate issue is. Very few people have more than one fifth gate issue. Two is a small percentage, and three, I don't recall. There must have been somebody with three. But usually it all goes back to where it starts. Where did you get the idea that you would grow up to be a loser? Where did that come from? And they, well, I'm not a loser. I said, well, okay. Where did you get the idea you wouldn't be secure and happy? These are two key words, secure and happy. Do you feel secure? Is a great interview question, by the way. I didn't even think of that when I was explaining that to you because I forget a lot. Do you feel secure? Now, they start talking about money and you say, well, look, I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about how you emotionally feel. Do you feel secure? Are you happy? Well, what do you mean by security? Money, safety? Yeah, we can talk about that, but do you feel like you're okay, you're going to be okay? Now, if they say yes, buy them a jelly donut and a cup of coffee and thank them for coming, and you're done. And by the way, I have escorted more than a few out of my office, and then I had them grab me sometimes and say, well, wait a minute, maybe I exaggerated. Maybe I'm not doing so great. Now, how do you remember? You'll find that you'll get better at it as you do it. But parents' names and grandparents' names, very important. I'm going to tell you why. Because it helps them remember their buried memories. You see, every gesture and every word has a handle on it. Like a baseball bat, it's got a handle. And the handle might be sticking out someplace, but the bat may be buried in the wall. So when you use the handles a lot, what'll happen is memories will start coming back. And that's the next thing you want to ask them in the initial interview. How much of your early childhood do you remember before you started going to school? Now, I know we're going to do this again in the fifth gate, but you might want to ask them in the interview because then you're going to show them you know what you're talking about. Because all emotionally troubled people have buried memories and frequently have lost years. And then you assure them right away. Assure them right away. A lot of your memories will come back because you'll feel safe to remember them. Everybody's got some buried memories from their childhood. The awful visit to the dentist, the awful time they had the piece of glass in their leg or nail in their foot, or, you know. As a matter of fact, I have a block memory of a nail in my foot now that I think about it. I stepped on a roofing nail and I felt like I was dying for 2 weeks. It was the most painful thing I ever experienced in my life. And yet I'd completely forgotten it. Just now, making up an example reminded me about that roofing nail. Okay, so you want them to believe you know what the heck you're doing, and the best way to do that is to tell them you do. And also explain to them about how buried memories work, and don't worry about it. This process will probably dislodge a lot of them for you. And you can actually say to them in the initial interview, you know, most people have problems they think happen later in life, but in fact, they've buried the fact that it started someplace very early. And here's a term to use a lot. When we're young, we don't have the ability to weigh things. Is this good? Is it bad? Is it true? Is it false? We don't weigh things when we're little kids very well. We haven't learned how to do that. Later on, we go back and we look at the same events, and suddenly we see them in a new light. But I was starting to say something now, you see? Dr. Hirsch? See, I forgot.
I was listening.
Duh. Duh. Okay. Yeah, and sometimes it's okay to use a big word, like psychodynamic. Most people kind of intuitively know what you mean. They don't necessarily have to have